Hi everyone, good morning. Welcome to Learn with Lorna 125. I'll do my usual and just wait a second for people to join before I launch into this week's subject. Hi John. So yes, welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna number 125. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service has 4 archive centres across the Highlands of Scotland in Inverness, Wick, Portree and Fort William, and together the 4 of those look after historic documents relating to the Highlands of Scotland dating over the last 700 or so years. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in watching and chatting to me through Learn with Lorna. If you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful for that. It enables us to continue to do the huge range of things that we do with our collections, so thank you to those of you who have done so. Sorry for not being here last week. I think it's the first one that I've unexpectedly missed in 2.5 years, so it's not that bad. But thank you so much for all your lovely messages. I can't tell you what a difference they make. So I had pushed on, as some of you predicted, with the sore throat and cough until it became laryngitis and tonsil stones. So who knew that was a thing? So on the mend, but not back to full strength yet, but on the mend to be able to speak to you today. So thank you so much for your lovely messages, and sorry again for not being here last week. So the episode I should have done last week on stories from Rassie, I've moved to next week, so we will get that again quite quickly. I've scheduled the rest of Learn with Lorna's for the rest of this year and already thinking about what I'm putting into 2023, which is quite extraordinary when you think when I started it back in April 2020, I wrote a kind of an outline for 14 episodes, and we're now I've put them in, like I say, to the end of this year, which takes us up to 130 something, and then through into the next year. It's quite extraordinary. So please do have a look at the upcoming events and register your interest on those across the 4 pages. But this week we are looking at storms and where they appear in our collections across the Highland Archive Service, the 4 centres. Because we're at that time of year in Scotland, I'm not sure where, I can see people watching from all sorts of different places, but we're at this time of year here where storms are becoming more and more common, and we're facing high winds and power cuts and blocked roads and felled trees and weather warnings, as well as the long dark days that we have here, which so many people hate and I absolutely love. We're into winter, and it was funny, I was sort of noting some notes together for this. I was going to say, we really don't have the power cuts and the storms we used to have. And then on Tuesday here in my house we had a unscheduled power cut for about 6 or 7 hours. So I scored that line out. So what do our collections tell us about storms in the Highlands in the past? Well, I've touched on some of these stories in past episodes. So for instance, the Wick Harbour Trust records, episode 24, or Obsessed with the Weather, episode 92. But I thought I would share some more with you. Scotland is of course part of an island nation, so we have a huge amount of coastline that is regularly battered by storms and high waters quite repeatedly. We're also a nation with nearly 800 islands and around the Scottish coast, and not all of course are inhabited, but it's often our coastline that takes the most of a battering. Have a listen to this extract from the second statistical account of 1845 from the parish of Edrahillis in Sutherland. So this is how they described it. Although we are not strangers to the terror of the thunderstorm, seldom or ever are any accidents heard of. Flashes of lightning are periodically common about the commencement of each quarter. A rare, if not an unprecedented, phenomenon in this latitude occurred in the winter of 1838 by an avalanche destroying no less than a herd of 12 deer, and such was the force of that terrific body that it not only killed the animals on the spot, but when the forester found them, their bones were crushed to pieces. The fury of sea storms is often the cause of great alarm and damage, particularly in winter, and to the observer on shore is magnificently grand when they are from the northwest. The noise of the billows of the Atlantic heaving against the rocks is tremendous, and only equalled by the height to which they are raised, known in some instances to be no less than about 600 feet against the precipitous rocks of Handa. Shipwrecks, however, are not so common as they were, owing to a lighthouse having been erected at Cape Wrath. It's a really vivid description of that, with the huge waves and the noise of the Atlantic. And I've done a previous Learn with Lorna specifically on the Wick Harbour Trust records, but I wanted to just share with you a flick through the Harbour Master's logbooks that just really shows the regularity of storms that battered that coast of Caithness and the massive impact that it has on lives and livelihoods. Here are just a few extracts that I've pulled from the Harbour Master's logbook of 1871-72, just to illustrate what I mean. So, Wednesday the 18th of December 1872, light extinguished at 7 a.m. The sea was never seen running higher in Wick Bay, many spectators watching the action and results of each succeeding wave on the new harbour works, as every wave threatened to engulf the whole structure. Stones of 5-ton weight were being tossed up from the back onto the platform, and the next sea carried them out again into the basin of the harbour. The very shore trembled by their vibrations. At 11:30, signs were but too evident that the works were yielding to the terrible pressure as the waves receded. Openings could be seen between the rubble work and the concrete. At 12:15 p.m, the concrete block at the outer ends of the works was displaced, but owing to the surf and spray, its position cannot be well determined. The gale continues unabated. The roar of the waves are deafening. Every precaution used for securing the materials on the shore. Lights lighted at 4:30 p.m. And then Wednesday the 17th of January 1872. The gale was at its height at 3:30 a.m. The wind and rain during the night were dreadful. Several tokens of its effect can be seen throughout the town: broken panes of glass, slate blown from houses, etc. Lights lighted at 5 p.m. 24th of January. The gale continues, the sea running high, causing a very great motion in the inner harbours. All the possible moorings are insufficient to hold the vessels. Mooring chains have been snapped asunder. Lights lighted at 5:30. Tuesday, the 21st of November 1871. Several vessels passed the bay before running before the gale under close reefed sails. The sea lashing the north shore, the spray rising to a great height. The new harbour works are partly protected, notwithstanding the heavy rollers continually tumbling over it. Danger signals exhibited day and night. Lights lighted at 5 p.m. And then finally, just as another example, Tuesday the 3rd of September 1872. During the night, one boat drove ashore at Shaltigo. Crew saved and nets all landed. The increasing gale is causing considerable anxiety on shore for the safety of boats at sea. 2 boats missed the entrance and were driven up the river and grounded on the land. The boat ashore got hauled off, brought into the harbour without much damage. The sea is breaking over the breakwater and doing some damage to the breach, half filled with concrete. Lights lighted at 8. And I think that really conjures up an image. There's various things in there. The strength of the sea is very clear. I particularly thought that there was a really evocative sentence in there. The very shore trembles by its vibrations. So there's the talk of the strength of the sea, the talk of the impact on infrastructure, broken panes of glass, slates blown from houses. The references to danger to ships. All possible moorings are insufficient. All mooring chains have been snapped asunder. And the fear of loss of life. So one of those entries said, the increasing gale is causing anxiety for the safety of the boats at sea. And I also think that it's very evocative, that description of the lights being lit to the time that's given. Each day the lights lit at 4 o'clock, lights lit at 4:30 to try and illuminate those short, dark days. And of course, ships were lost and damaged and lives were lost. We hold some really interesting documents relating to this. This is an example from our Borough of Fortrose collection held at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, and it's a really interestingly titled A Protest Against Wind and Weather. So it's a legal document. It's been heard in a court, but it's a protest, but it's again a protest against the wind and weather. And this, it's interesting. The document has an original date of 1803. Yes, sorry, I was just reading that and going, am I right? Because I haven't transcribed it, it's the original handwritten document. So yes, 1803, but then it's scored out with 1820 over it, and I'm not sure which is the correct date, unless it's been a template that's been reused. But it describes the appearance of John Walker, who is the master of the ship the Dove of Sunderland, and he appears in front of the magistrates and the bailies, and he says that as master of the said ship, he had sailed with her in good order and condition from the port of Arbroath for Lovat on the Firth of Beaulieu with a cargo of freestone, and on his passage upon Monday the 19th day of the said month, about 12 o'clock at night, after he had got above Fort George on the muddy firth, there arose and happened a hard gale of wind, which continued for a considerable time easterly, and drifted the vessel, notwithstanding all the exertions of himself and the crew, upon a sandbank at the entrance of the River Ness into the said firth, a short way below Kessock Roads, where she remained until the following Thursday, where she was got off. And the reason he's taken this protest to court is that damage has been done to the ship, and his testimony is to say, yes, there's damage to my ship, but this is not through mishandling, it's through the fault of the weather. So basically what we would see in insurance is an act of God. And in that particular case, that his testimony was believed and the accident was put down to the storm being the cause. And of course, sometimes lives were lost. Many times lives were lost. And I've spoken about this before, horrendous tragedies like Black Saturday in August 1858, when terrible storm conditions, poor visibility, and lack of equipment and appropriate rescue gear all kind of culminated into the deaths of 37 fishermen off the north coast. Here's another particularly powerful record of a storm which led to loss of life in Caithness in 1857. This is obviously a document that we hold in nucleus in the Caithness archives. At 4 p.m, a vessel was seen through the haze, running down on the bay with her larboard tack on board. Captain Tudor very promptly ordered signals of danger to be hoisted half-mast at the signal post at Shaltogo and lookout tower. The vessel was then at a considerable offing and might have kept away for the Orkneys or Pentland Firth, but taking no notice of these signals of danger, the vessel proceeded for the bay, the sea making a complete breach of her. Captain Tudor ordered the lifeboat to be in readiness with a complete crew. The vessel could now be seen to be a Dutch galliot deeply laden. When more than half bay in, she hauled down her forestaysail. The vessel rounded to and was brought up with the small bore anchor. And if any of you are ship owners or people with great seamanship knowledge, apologies if I'm pronouncing things wrong. The sea breaking right over her, the second anchor was dropped in a short time thereafter. So they say that a portion of the crew took to the rigging, and so you can see that the ship's really, really struggling in this wind and high waves. The excitement on shore was very great, as there was no likelihood of any assistance being got from the shore. The lifeboat crew, seeing the great risk and danger that would be in attempting to board the vessel, with the exception of Alan MacLeod, coxswain, none of the regular crew would venture afloat. Captain Tudor then appealed to the crowd for volunteers. A crowd was soon thereafter mustered. Captain Tudor gallantly going on board and taking command, the boat was sufficiently manned onto the beach, so this is the lifeboat has been sufficiently manned and got safely launched through the surf and pulled out to the windward of the vessel, the sea at the time running high, but the boat behaving nobly. But in dropping down on the vessel, a tremendous sea was making up to windward and swiftly rolled along with great impetuosity, threatening to engulf vessel, lifeboat and all. I don't know if anyone else is like me, I'm really not good with the sea. I find the sea very frightening, and disaster films like this I find very difficult to watch, and I just think reading it is, it's very powerful description. The boat was handled in a seaman-like manner, kept end onto it. For a moment it was doubtful whether she would surmount it or not, but although a body of water did come on board, breaking and washing away almost the whole of the oars, the next moment she could be seen on the crest of the wave, and thus borne past the vessel with the greatest rapidity. During the brief interval betwixt the first and second sea, Captain Tudor could be seen divesting himself of his coat in the event of having to swim for his life. So they've set out this lifeboat to go and rescue this Dutch ship, and it's just the description of them battling the tides to try and help. In a moment, a second sea, more dreadful than the first, engulfed boat and crew, at least to all appearance from the shore. The piercing shrieks from the crowd at this fearful crisis was heart-rending. The boat righted slowly on the surface, and although full of water, with the exception of one poor fellow who was lost hold and was washed clear of her, the whole of the remainder of the crew bravely kept their position and their presence of mind. Their efforts being to save the man overboard, and for that purpose lifebuoys and every available article was thrown overboard to him. The boat being rendered helpless by the losing of oars, no assistance could be further rendered to the poor fellow struggling with the waves, but the next sea covered him from their sight, and the same wave carried the boat, now in her helpless condition, on towards the shore. So the lifeboat has gone out to try and help. The lifeboat's coming engulfed. They thought all the lives were lost, but only one person has now gone overboard. So the boat is brought to shore. A rush was made towards the beach by masses of people from both sides of the river, and numbers waded through the surf and got ropes thrown on board and dragged the boat and crew towards the river entrance. Captain Tudor with the crew left to shift their clothes. Captain Tudor leaving instruction to have a second set of oars, buoys, etc. put immediately on board in readiness for his return in the event of any accident. A second crew could not be easily got. The bell was sent round for volunteers, and after a lapse of some time only 2 offered their services, one being one of the former queue. By this time the weather had considerably moderated. The flood tide set in, the vessel seeming to hold on and ride it out. And it's just a really powerful description of the bravery, and Captain Tudor saying, I need to go and take my wet clothes off so I don't, suffer something like hypothermia, but get the boat ready, I'll go back out, find more volunteers. But of course, who wants to volunteer after just witnessing that? The names of the gallant crew are as follows: Captain Tudor, RN, Alan MacLeod, Alexander Cormack, Alexander Campbell, George Mackay, James Budge, David Brock, Donald Macbeath, Alexander Bremner, James Sinclair, Robert Geddes, Donald Campbell, Alexander Forbes, Walter Hossack, and Alexander Bain. You remember one of them went overboard. The following entries are also found in the Harbour Master's logbook. Friday, September the 11th, 1857, Alexander Bain's body was cast on the shore at the Wick side of the river. And then the next day, the man Alexander Bain, who lost his life in the brave attempt to save the crew of the Dutch galliot on the evening of the 9th, was today interred. Almost the whole of the vessels had their colours at half-mast. The flagstaff at the lookout tower too. Shaltigo and the Customs House had flags at half-mast. Captain Tudor, Collector Boyd, and the harbour officials attended the funeral. It's a really descriptive account of what happened and the loss of that life. And of course, storms at sea often result in the deployment of the lifeboat, and I think you get a real idea of there from the huge amount of bravery that is required to take part in a lifeboat rescue. The other thing that happens as a result of this constant battering of our shoreline of wind and water is that the coastline itself shifts and changes and is transformed. The OS name books, which I've spoken about before, produced in about the 1860s and 70s to accompany the first edition Ordnance Survey maps, the OS name books reveal this. So for instance, this is an extract from Harper's Bay in Caithness. This name applies to a portion of the coast close to Burnside, which at certain seasons of the year is covered with sand, although at present there is very little sand to be seen, it having disappeared and left the rocks quite bare. I may mention that this portion of the coast alters its appearance with almost every storm, i.e. what is sand before a storm will probably be rock after it, and of course this change makes a considerable difference to the low water line. And there's also another a very beautifully worded description of the impact of storms in the OS Namebook entry for Dunnet Head, which includes this extract from Calder's History of Caithness. An imaginary line drawn from Claredon Head to Dunnet Head would define the limits of Dunnet Bay. It forms a deep indentation, somewhat in the shape of an oblong, and runs down towards the southeast for a space of nearly 4 miles. Its breadth across is about 2 miles, and it's completely landlocked on the south side by the low rocky shores of Castle Hill and Merkel, and on the north or Dunnet side by a lofty wall of precipices. It's a beautiful inlet, but still a very dangerous one, when the wind blows right down from the northwest. When roused by a heavy westerly gale, the bay, from the tumultuous agitation and magnitude of the breakers, presents a sublime spectacle. The huge, long, white-crested billows, lashed into fury by the storm, seem to chase each other, and as they hurry on towards the beach they burst with astounding force. The broken surge churned into foam, rushing up along the sand with the speed of a racehorse, and then rushing back again as rapidly as if sucked down by the raging flood. Here and there a few gulls, perhaps in quest of prey, may be seen vainly struggling with the blast, while from all sides of the bay is heard one continued roar, like that of the loudest thunder. We just don't think we write things like that anymore. Some people do, but there's an entry in the place name books for a place in Sutherland which says that the storm waves crashing create such a loud, thunderous noise that they can be heard for 7 miles distant. I've spoken mostly so far on the coastline and the storms at sea, and largely spoken about Caithness. What happens as storms move inland, though, through canals, through rivers and through inland watercourses? Well, at Hark and at Lochaber, we hold canal and estate records which show the height that floodwaters have reached and the areas of damage or particular potential damage. And although I've been talking largely about the 1800s, we hold records that show the impact of storms long before that and much more recently. So for instance, the huge floods of February, 7th of February 1989, where winter storm rainfall in one 24-hour period is said to have equated more than the previous month in the course of one day. And then in stages, the parapets, the 4 spans and the train line of the rail viaduct in Inverness crashed into the River Ness. A huge volume of masonry and debris being swept out into the harbour. We hold some photographs of this huge incident and also a copy of the engineer's preliminary report, which was carried out really quickly. The following day the engineers came out, and the harbour engineer records in that a hydrographic survey was immediately carried out within 2 days. The dredging, it details the dredging that's required, underwater inspections that's needed, priorities, cost considerations, what the implications will be if they don't carry out the work. So it's really interesting. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It seems so strange to me that I would have been 6 at the time that happens, and I have no, even remote concept of it happening. But I'm sure some people watching will remember that happening in 1989. So we hold the engineer's records, some photographs within a privately deposited collection, but also there will of course be records within our local authority collections and other collections that detail this. Another story of a flood that can be read across different collection types and across different record types is the story of the Uig flood of October 1877. And there are various records relating to this in our Skye and Lochaber archive. Here's how it was recorded in the Clarion, and again, quite a powerful evocative description. Autumn 1877 was as usual wet and boisterous, with the incessant rain making the harvesting of crops a very difficult matter, but the elements showed no sign of the impending catastrophe. On the Sabbath evening, 13th of October 1877, a cloudburst swooped on the upper part of Glenuig, and in a movement of biblical times, the Conan and Hinsdale rivers thundered down their terrific floods, obliterating crops, sweeping flocks of sheep into the sea, and entirely changing the landscape in its rush to the sea. David Ferguson, 52 years old, the Grieve, or the estate manager, has been born in Dingwall, who's the son of Robert Ferguson and Isabella Mackenzie. He was listed on the 1861 census as living in Snizort near Kingsborough, and at the age of 37. By 1877, when this flood happened, he was living in Uig in a house up on the hill where he could see this happening. As the floodwaters swirled around Uig Lodge, the summer residence of Major William Fraser, proprietor of the Kilmuir estate, David Ferguson decided to go down and to check the safety of the building and the building's contents. His family didn't want him to go, but he is said to have insisted, and again, as always, you'll excuse my Gaelic pronunciation, but he's said to have insisted, using the phrase Hanja Shivrashach Gilas Haya Maestrich, which, loosely, if my pronunciation is anywhere near right, translates as the good servant is faithful to his master. So he's saying, I will go and check this house, my master's house. Ferguson's son became increasingly worried because the floodwaters rose and rose, and he tried to go down and reach his father. He was joined by other members of the farm staff and friends, but by the time they got there, the water was up to their waists. And soon after that, one of them was carried away off his feet by the current. They shouted to attract Ferguson's attention, but they couldn't make their voices heard above the roaring of the flood, and by now the water was up to their chins, and they were forced to retreat, just praying that David Ferguson would be able to save himself. Around midnight, waves of enormous power were released, which caused the river to depart from its natural course, carrying with it, as battering rams, the stones of the bridge and countless boulders from the gorge. In a fit of vile vengeance, the River Conan left its natural course, making its way straight to the lodge, carrying with it a bridge which spanned it, large boulders and trees sweeping everything out of its way. The lodge was carried to sea from its very foundations. The ancient churchyard, which was used by the village and the areas surrounding, was completely swept out to sea, leaving only 3 graves and 1 tombstone on the brae. Hundreds of corpses in different stages of decay could be seen floating out in the tide of Uruguay. People searching in the shores for weeks for the remains of their community, searching between the rubble and the flooded houses for the flooded fields for any surviving crops and potatoes to feed themselves, and among the rubbish and debris of the houses were naked bodies, coffins, skulls and bones. It's quite a vivid description. Can you imagine something that horrendous happening and being witness to it? That story was also recalled in 1952, again in the Clarion of Skye, by David, the man who went missing there, David's granddaughter, who had been told by her grandmother that story of watching David disappear. So she had been only a child at the time that her father had disappeared, but she had watched him, the story of the... I'm muddling up my words here. So David's granddaughter was told that story by her grandmother, who remembered watching David's torch go from room to room in Kilmuir Lodge until the house just disappeared. Until the torch just disappeared and then the house. So we have that account of it, but then also we hold it at Skye and Loch Alsh Archive telegrams which record the discovery of David Ferguson's remains, the arrangements for his coffin construction and funeral, and the impact of the wider community on the wider community of this huge devastation. Also, we hold letters, estate records, records in the roads and bridges, collections of the local authority that talk about repairs to infrastructure and so on. So you can see a really wide and broad picture of the impact that has. So you can see the emotional impact of the graveyard being upwashed, of the bodies being, visible and moving in the water, And then also all the loss of crops, the rebuilding of bridges. You can use different record types to see the impact on different parts of the community. Interestingly, that flood was seen by many as an act of God because of Captain Fraser's treatment of the people in and around his estate. So, for instance, one newspaper reported it like this: as punishment for his wrongdoings, his misdeeds, his injustice and his oppressive acts, God has caused the floods to break forth and destroy his property. Mighty rivers may break down their banks in winter and sweep to death the flocks that fattened on the soil they fertilised in summer. Tempest may shake our dwellings and scourge before the elements of pestilence. Quite strong words. Now, I've talked mostly about water so far, waves and floods and the damage of that. But what about water in another form? What about snowstorms? The school logbooks that we hold are full of stories of snowstorms, and I know I've talked about this many times before. So, for instance, Drumbeg in 1930, in 20th of March. Today there is a heavy fall of snow and the roads are blocked with deep drifts. No scholars attended. Or Staxigo in Caithness in 1969. Fierce snowstorm, 6 children snowbound in school until the workmen could help them get home. Or Glenfinnan in 1945, owing to severe snowstorms, children unable to attend. So there are numerous references to that within school logbooks, and also numerous references to roads being blocked, to travel being impossible. And of course, one of the most famous examples of this was in 1955, when such severe snowfall, along with high winds and low temperatures, led to Operation Snowdrop across Caithness and Sutherland, which I've done a full Learn with Lorna on in episode 42. The intense frost, the winds and the snow that on that occasion led to pupils being stranded in schools, homes being without power or access for over a week, trains stopped mid-trip, Orient Express, just saying, and the use of the military to have to airdrop food, medical supplies and even coffins. There's a blog about Operation Snowdrop on the Nucleus website, and as I said, I've done a previous Learn with Lorna on it. If you have any memories of Operation Snowdrop, and I know that viewers of Learn with Lorna have got memories of Operation Snowdrop, please do get in touch with Nucleus because they are looking to put together a news article about it, so please do help them out with that if you're able to do so. And of course, storms like this have happened over centuries, with lives not only being disrupted but also lost as a result of that extreme weather. One famous story of a life lost due to snow, in my part of the world anyway, is the story of the Black Officer, Captain John Macpherson of Ballacrone, Ian Dhu McAllister, as he would have been most commonly known at the time, who died in Gaik in 1800. I'll read you the story as it appears in the OS Namebook for King Usi and Inch, but if you're interested, then I would encourage you to follow it up because there are all sorts of theories and variations on this story. Articles about the incident, articles about the Black Officer, and a lot of historians have spoken about it and written about it and uncovered contemporary accounts and so on, including my wonderful, much referenced school history teacher David Taylor. So this is how it's recorded in the OS Namebook. In the beginning of January 1800, Captain Macpherson set out with 4 attendants to stalk for deer among the mountains that skirt the parish to the south. They took provisions with them sufficient to serve from Monday to Friday, on which day they intended to return. They were lodged in a house in the valley of Gaik, generally inhabited by herdsmen, but then unoccupied. It was built of stone, with the couple driven to the ground for greater stability. It stood on a rising ground at the foot of one of the lofty mountains which nearly surround the valley, fronting the northwest. The first 2 days of the sojourn of the hunters were calm and frosty. On Wednesday evening there came on a dreadful storm of wind and snow from the southeast, which increased to a hurricane during the night. This continued till Friday forenoon, when the weather became settled. As Captain Macpherson and his party did not return on Friday evening, fears began to be entertained for their safety, and a messenger was dispatched on Saturday to ascertain the cause of their delay. On approaching the place where the house had stood, he was surprised to find that it had entirely disappeared, and that the whole place was covered with an immense depth of snow. Having discovered a hat and a powder flask, he naturally dreaded that the captain and his companions had perished. Having communicated these facts on his return, a party of about 12 men set out for the spot early on the Sabbath morning. On approaching the spot, the ruins of the house were discovered among the snow, in some instances scattered to a distance of 200 or 300 yards. After long laborious search, they discovered the only remaining vestige of a house under a depth of snow of at least 6 feet. 4 of the bodies were discovered, and from their position it appears that the unfortunate men had been retiring to bed when the direful event took place. Captain Macpherson was sitting with his coat off on the remains of a bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, with the one hand grasping the wrist of the other which supported his head. In the other room, the other 2 of the party, one of them Macpherson from Glentruim, lay in each other's arms, half out of bed, with the greyhounds across their feet. The 4th, Angus MacGillivray, fox hunter, was lying upon his back on the fragments of a long seat, with a thigh broken, one shoe on, a quid of tobacco in his mouth, and covered with stones and turf. 2 guns were found in the middle of the room, one of them bent and the other broken in pieces. The body of the remaining sufferer, Duncan Macfarlane, a man of nervous temperament, who had jumped out and got out of bed, if not out the house, was found 6 weeks afterwards, when the snow had abated, lying at a distance of 200 yards, partially undressed. In accounting for this lamentable catastrophe, it may be stated that the immense mass of snow that covered the site of the house lay in a straight line between a steep part of the hill and a stream that flowed at its base. Beyond the boundaries of this bank, the snow was quite thin on sides and a few days completely disappeared. The rubbish of the house, the body last found, all lay in the direction of the valley, clearly indicating that the force operated in that direction, which was likewise in that which the wind blew so furiously, thus leading to the inference that an avalanche had destroyed the building and formed a grave for its unfortunate occupants. This inference is further supported by the fact that between the time of the catastrophe and the discovery of the last body, an immense mass of snow fell from the same hill and rested at the back of the former building, and was only arrested by the remainder of the mass that had fallen before. And there's, as I say, it's a famous story in my part of the world, the Black Officer, in part because he had quite an interesting reputation himself, so I would encourage you to go and have a look at more about that if you're interested. And there's a plaque on the site as well. And that area continues and continues to have heavy snowfall in the winter, and the storms continue to wreak havoc on health and lives. And that's apparent also in the evidence gathered by the Dewar Committee. You may remember I spoke about the Dewar Committee in passing. I've yet to do a full episode on the Highlands and Islands Medical Service. But the Dewar Committee toured the Highlands, speaking to a wide variety of people in 1912 to assess the picture of healthcare in the Highlands and Islands. And when they met with a Dr. MacDonald in Badenoch, he told them about the challenges of covering that allotted area and reaching the houses 20 miles away with no road and only a 9-mile path. And the fact that in the winter the weather was so it could be so severe that it would really severely impact his ability to serve that community. And this is a description, I'm well aware I'm over time, but I wasn't here last week, so I'm sure you won't mind. This is a description of what the committee learned from Dr. MacDonald, and this is a description found on our website Ambala. We also hold the original evidence book in the Highland Archive Centre. The committee were told the story of a doctor who was called out during a harsh winter's night. As he travelled from Oban to a shepherd's house some 12 miles off, he was caught in a snowstorm, lost his way and had to be guided back to his house by another shepherd. So they're hearing an example of this. Then they speak to Dr. MacDonald and they say, in a separate incident, a Dr. MacDonald from Badenoch received a hero's medal for crossing the hills to reach patients at great risk to his own life. On the 9th of January 1910, there was a heavy thaw and a severe gale of wind in the Badenoch district of Inverness. Dr. MacDonald received a telegram informing him that a patient who lived at a distance of 22 miles was seriously ill. Starting out at 7 o'clock in the morning, he made his way by Dalwhinnie and the side of Loch Erich to Ben Alder Lodge, where it was found that it was not possible to complete the journey by the usual road, inasmuch as the streams which had to be crossed were greatly swollen. He accordingly made his way through a forest and over the shoulder of Ben Alder, travelling on foot a distance of about 12 miles, and being under the necessity of wading across many mountain streams which were swollen into torrents. Masses of snow and ice were floating down the streams, and the footing to be obtained among the boulders was uncertain, rendering the task one of considerable danger. He did not reach the house of that patient until 6 o'clock in the evening, when it was found that the patient was seriously ill with pneumonia. Although Dr. MacDonald was far from well himself after the long day's exposure and exertion, it is stated that he worked with the patient the whole evening and through the night, and on into the following day, until there were signs of recovery. For some time Dr. MacDonald himself felt the effects of this journey, although he was able to continue his work, and he was awarded a Carnegie Hero Trust Fund. The Carnegie Hero Fund trustees awarded a bronze medallion to Dr. MacDonald in view of the courage he had shown in the exceptional circumstances with the object of saving a life of a patient. And so we have been for centuries in this part of the world, and we continue to be, although not as much, battered by wind and snow and storm and flood. And as we see far too regularly in our news bulletins, particularly at the moment, the impact of severe weather can be absolutely devastating as it impacts so many places around the world, changing landscapes, changing livelihoods, and causing loss of life. I hope you've enjoyed that. I see exactly what you mean. I'm seeing your comment there. I'm thoroughly enjoying. Is that the right thing to say? I hope you've enjoyed the episode, given the fact that there are some difficult stories in it. Thank you so much for rejoining me this week. Again, sorry for not being well last week, and next week we'll pick up back again with the stories from Rassie. Thank you for joining me. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very grateful. And thank you for those of you who I know have done so already. Thank you.